Hi, and welcome to this presentation on the collection of streaming content at the Netarkivet, or the Danish Web Archive, where we look for content, metadata, and graphical user interfaces. Whoops, clicking here. A short outline, and remember, feel free to pause the video at any time to look at numbers or details in these slides. Let's make a brief introduction and look at the theoretical framework and methods, and then present preliminary findings in this ongoing research project. To introduce myself, I'm a PhD in media studies, and I work as a project researcher at the Department of Digital Cultural Heritage at the Royal Danish Library. This project I'm presenting findings from is a collaboration between me, the project researcher, and the Netarkivet, the Danish Web Archive. This is part of my research project on the collection of streaming, where we map and try to ascertain what should be collected and preserved as part of our cultural heritage. I will present preliminary findings, and most of us would agree that streaming is a part of our digital cultural heritage. Hence, we need to map streaming services in Denmark and the content metadata and streaming, graphical user interfaces. So there's a need to document access and collect various types of published digital cultural content. And there's a need to document the streaming service, which includes what the users interact with, hence the graphical user interfaces, which is all in all a part of our contemporary culture, our media culture. I find it useful to frame this mapping of streaming using a set of dimensions of streaming, looking at professional streaming versus user-generated streaming. These are continua, these are dynamics, as much as legal streaming versus private streaming is also a dimension of the concept of streaming, and as it is evolving. We could look at on-demand streaming versus live streaming, and then there's streaming on focused platforms versus multi-purpose platforms. And it's also useful to discern between niche audience streaming services and general audience streaming services. This is taken from Spilker and Kolbjørnsen's research article from a few years ago, looking towards the typology of this evolving concept. What I find useful is to introduce a sixth dimension, a time-sensitive dimension, looking at present-day streaming versus heritage streaming. And what I've put on here are a couple of notions, issues to be dealt with, looking at these various dimensions. For this project, and looking into what is actually available or captured or harvested already for the Danish Web Archive, I use this open explorative approach proposed by Fage Butler, Lederer, and Brugger. They have looked at the evolution of the concept of mHealth in the Danish Web Archive, whereas I want to look at the term stream and streaming tjeneste, which is streaming service in Danish. The aims are to verify their method and also to test our skills in-house in the department, and of course to extract similar findings about the term streaming and how this has evolved in the Danish Web Archive. The biggest differences being the semantic variance between mHealth, this is a relatively small term, or the use of it is, is limited, as opposed to the term streaming or stream. Preliminary findings, we know that we are having to use a combination of collection methods, looking at streaming services with the same catalog, that would be books or music. We try to make deals with intermediary aggregators to collect content and metadata. For video streaming services, who have different catalogs, we've so far made deals with publishers directly to use their APIs or have them upload to FTP. This is the case for Danish National Public Service, DR. We're harvesting their content through API. And also, of course, streaming services have websites and applications, and we're looking to see how well is web harvesting doing in this regard. Because most streaming services, of course, have presentation websites, they have web players, they have apps for various devices, and these are all relevant given our hypothesis that we have to address the streaming experience. So our focus is what is in the archive and how can we describe it. First and foremost, when and how often did the term stream and the term streaming tjeneste and streaming service occur in the Danish web? Using the interface Solid Wayback, we can search and find what is in the archive, and we get a nice overview of the number of entries matching the query, and also we get an overlook of the domains involved and the types of content found. And you can see the number of web pages. HTML is far the dominant type as opposed to video. I'll come back to that. The roughly 300 million hits is roughly 1% of the entire Danish web archive of 30 billion documents. Looking at stream using an n-gram, we get a nice graph showing an evolution of the concept or the term stream and all its semantic variants as it's evolved through the years. Looking at streaming tjeneste, the Danish word for streaming service, we get a more limited corpus, and again we get a nice overview of the matches. And looking again at an n-gram, we see, as we would have suspected, that streaming services become noticeable as a term around the 2010 and onwards, when the first streaming services are launched, and 2012, of course, being the year Netflix launches in Denmark. We can do some rough data cleaning within this Solar index. So if we remove quick tabs and the domain søndagsavisen.dk, we get what we would suspect to also reflect the evolution, more of a flat graph, not these spikes around 2013, sorry, and 2017. Looking at the specific content type, video, it's altogether different story, which has also led us down the path of doing deals with content aggregators, finding videos through different means than web harvesting. This shows that special types of harvesting of social media, such as TikTok or Facebook, and also YouTube and news, various regional news sites, has produced videos from these different domains. Looking also to find or to see whether we can find year-on-year captures of the 50 most prominent streaming services in Denmark and their content. Our initial look into this has produced mixed results. It's quite the job to try and ascertain for each streaming service. Do we have their website? Do we have their metadata? And what can we actually find? And looking for applications specifically, there are different ways to do it. The one in the Solar index looking for content type extensions did not prove very useful, did not prove many hits in the web archive. Another approach is to look for screenshots in archived web pages from different app stores. Other ventures of note are in the Internet Archive. You can look through the APK archive or the phone software archive. They're relevant for international streaming services, not so much for Danish applications. So there's a lot in the archive, and very little seems to have been collected. And moving forward, these are preliminary findings, as I mentioned. We will be trying to test our skills and validate the method, as I mentioned. And our next step is to look at which actors on the Danish web used streaming chains the most, trying to make a month-on-month comparison of lists of URLs, and also who among these actors were the most important for streaming services, and how did that change over time. So implementing network analysis using the Gefi software. And we will continue to search for year-on-year captures of these 50 most prominent streaming services across text, books, music, and video, to see what has actually been collected in the Danish Web Archive. Further along the road, we might try to explore, can we document the highly personalized streaming experiences that implement very dynamic and fluid graphic user interfaces? This is Spotify on mobile wishing me a good morning. And you can see more in Pajkovic research article. Thank you very much, and let's discuss. I'm looking forward to our conversation. Thank you very much.